communism created a lot of wars, and it led to a lot of disaster. Communism was one of the most popular movements throughout the 20th century, okay? And the problem that Marx diagnoses is capitalism makes people miserable for three reasons. Okay, so the issues of capitalism. The first issue is that it is all-encompassing, all-consuming. So in other words, it just grows and grows. And because it has to grow and grow to create value, it starts wars. So you have imperialism, right? Because as a factory owner, you want to create new markets, you want access to cheaper goods, you want access to cheaper labor. Therefore, you force your government to go invade other countries like China, India, Africa, okay? So capitalism creates wars and human misery all around the world. It's all consuming. It's always expanding. Okay? Second problem with capitalism is that it consolidating. And the idea here is this. Capitalism can only lead to extreme inequality. Why? Because the point of capitalism is to generate as much wealth as possible. So to do that, we want to consolidate our wealth. So maybe there's 10 of us with $1 million each, right? Well, we're better off just putting our money together and then investing it together, right? Which creates massive inequality. So over time, Marx believes that because capitalism is all-consuming and consolidating, it will destroy the middle class. Unless you're super wealthy, you won't have any money, okay? If you are just like a small factory owner, you'll be bought out by a large factory owner. And quite honestly, this is what's happening in the world today, okay? If you are a small house owner in America, well, you're going to be bought out by a company. And then the company's going to use your house to rent to other people, okay? So this is a pattern that's happening throughout the world today, and that's why Marx is seeing a massive resurgence in our world today, right? Now, the third problem is alienating. And here, Marx explains that there are 4 types of alienation. Okay? The first type of alienation is the alienation of labor. And what this means is this. As humans, we want to create stuff. We are fundamentally creative. We want to create art products. We want to cook. We want to teach. We want to express our individuality. Okay? And why we want to do that is when we express our individuality, when we create things, we support the community. Right? So when I teach you guys learn. And when you learn, you feel good, you thank me, and that confirms my humanity. That confirms my individuality. So society is a mechanism for each of us to exchange our creativity in a way that affirms our own individuality. Okay? Does that make sense? All right? The problem with capitalism is it takes use value, okay, what this thing is used for, and replaces it for like exchange value. Okay, which is how much this thing is worth. And these are 2 different opposites, okay? Oh, sorry, these are 2 different concepts. So use value is, I cook a apple pie, and then I give it to you, and you eat it, and you're like, wow, this is a really awesome apple pie. Thank you so much. And then you feel good, I feel good, okay? That's use value. Exchange value is, I cook this apple pie, and I give it to someone, who then goes sells to someone. I never meet that person, okay? And I'm not, and I don't know what happens to the pie, but I'm paid like $5 for it, all right? So that's the idea of exchange value. And as such, what Marx says is, this exchange of goods does not affirm our individuality, therefore it makes us miserable, because we don't know why we're doing anything anymore, okay? Before, we were doing things in order to support our community, in order to please other people, in order to affirm our humanity. Now we're just making stuff because of wage labor, right? Wages, to get paid. Okay? So that's alienating for us. Okay? This makes sense, right? Great. Second is that it alienates us from ourselves. Why? Because as human beings, we are very complex, we are multifaceted, and we're always evolving. But for capitalism, what matters is division of labor, okay? Specialization, because that's what allows for the most rapid industrial growth. And so, in other words, you cease to be you and you become a hand, or maybe a finger, or maybe an eye, or maybe an ear, okay? But you cease to be complete. You're just like a cog in the machine. You're just a piece of the puzzle. And that alienates you from who you are really. It prevents you from achieving your full potential as a creative, vibrant human being. Okay, that's the second issue. The third issue is it alienates us from nature. Okay, why? Because capitalism grows by exploiting humans and by exploiting nature. It cuts down trees. It destroys the environment. It creates air pollution. We can no longer drink clean water. Okay, it destroys the nature, and it makes us feel like we must destroy nature if we are to feed our families. So it alienates us from our nature. Whereas historically, we have been in a symbiotic relationship with nature, where we thank nature for feeding us, but we're always replenishing, we're always protecting nature. All right? And the fourth type of alienation is the alienation from humanity. All right? So before, from most of history, we were cooperating with each other, we were helping each other out, okay? Because that's the only way you could survive. But capitalism forces us to compete against each other. Okay? And the example, of course, is school, where because of grades, you see your classmates as competitors. Right? But if there are no grades, then you might help each other learn. You might tutor each other in homework and help each other with homework and tests. Okay? Okay? So that does that make sense? So the idea here is, let's just say that like maybe 5 people have to carry some goods to a store. Okay, that's your job. One person falls down, breaks his leg, and cries out for help. Well, we should go help that person, right? But the logic of capitalism is you can't do that because the manager will fine you for being late. Okay, does that make sense? All right, so that's why Marx thinks that this will alienate us from our humanity. And this part of Marx, where Marx diagnoses the problems of capitalism, is considered brilliant, okay? This is a perfect encapsulation of all the issues with capitalism. That was true in the 1850s, in the 19th century, but it's also true today. If you look at the world today, then we also have these issues. And if you analyze Marx's diagnosis of capitalism, then it helps explain why the world is the way it is. Okay? All right. So, and because of these pressing issues, because people are suffering so much, they see Marxism, they see communism as salvation and redemption. That's the appeal. Okay? Because the capitalism has made life so miserable for a majority of people. Okay? All right. So, but the problem is, we know that this prophecy of Marx, that we will naturally evolve into communism, has not panned out. In fact, communism has caused a lot of human misery as well. And so, why is that the case? And so what I'm going to show you now is, even though Marx has this beautiful theory, it's also wrong, okay, for a variety of reasons. So let's analyze his understanding of history and show how it's wrong. Okay, the first thing is, let's go back to the hunter-gatherer agriculture transition. The first class I ever taught, like a long time ago, is the transition from hunter-gatherer to agriculture didn't make any sense. As a hunter-gatherer, you didn't have a scarcity problem. In fact, you ate really well. You worked less, you ate more. And we know because if you dig up skeletons of hunter-gatherers, they're taller than farmers. In fact, they're a lot taller. So hunter-gatherers were on average like 6 foot, okay, which is like really, really tall, right? And farmers were like on average maybe 5 foot. That's a huge difference. Okay? So using the economic argument of Marx, this makes no sense. All right? And what I explained to you before is, it's not economics that drives human history, it's religion that drives human history. Okay? So we settled down in order to practice a cult, to practice a religion, because maybe one place was considered divine for whatever reason. And as a result, we developed agriculture, which led to civilization. So the Marx formulation that religion comes last is wrong. It's religion that comes first, okay? It's religion that leads to agriculture, which leads to civilization. All right? So that's what Marx gets wrong. Also, the transition from feudalism to capitalism was not driven by technology. It was driven by religion. All right? So let me explain. Okay, so the feudalism, the dominant religion at the time was the Catholic religion. When we go into industrial capitalism, the dominant religion is Protestantism, okay? So, as we discussed before, the Catholic religion was an imperial bureaucracy led by the Pope. And there were many religious reformers who thought this was abhorrent. This went against the will of God. Okay? And so what they proposed was this. They proposed a religion which was democratic, in which everyone had access to God. Okay? Before, you had to listen to the priest. You couldn't read the Bible by yourself. Now you had to read the Bible yourself in order to access God by yourself. Okay? And there were two major transitions. The first is, before, in order to get to heaven, you had to use justification by works. All this means is you do good things. You give money to the church. You primarily give money to the church, okay? All right? But because the Protestants want to reduce the power of the Catholic Church, they said, no, what matters is justification by faith. It doesn't matter how much money you give to the church. What matters is, do you truly believe in God? Okay, that's what matters. So that's the first major difference. And then the Protestants, in order to reduce the power of the church, because the church said, only if you listen to us can we guarantee you access to heaven, right? So what the Protestants said is, no. Access to heaven is predestined. So they have predestination. In other words, at the beginning of time, God has already decided who will go to heaven and who will go to hell. He's already decided. So doesn't matter what the church tells you, doesn't matter how much money you give to the church, you're all going to hell if you don't truly believe in God. All right? So the Protestant religion was a direct response to the Catholic religion. Now this creates a new problem. Okay? The problem is this. How do you know you truly believe in God? How do you know that you are one of the elect? How do you know that you were chosen by God to go to heaven? This creates anxiety, right? Anxiety, as we know, leads to OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, right? So how do you compensate for OCD? Well, you make a lot of money. But not only do you make a lot of money, but you don't spend it. Because that wealth now is an indicator to you and to others that you are truly one of the elect, that you are saved by God, that you are chosen by God to go to heaven. And that's the birth of capitalism. Okay? Does that make sense? All right? It was not technology driven because the technology at that time was everywhere. But it was only in Europe did you have industrial capitalism. It was because of the Protestant faith. That's what drove it. Okay, so you're generating this wealth not to appease God, but to appease your anxiety. You understand? You won't give money to God because God doesn't need your money, okay? But having this money is confirmation to yourself that you will go to heaven. Because this money can only be made because of your faith in God. Do you understand? Okay? How do you know you believe in God? Because you worked hard and God made you wealthy. And that's the logic driving capitalism. So Marx missed this. Okay? So let's summarize and say, look, Marx made three fundamental mistakes. The first is people care about religion, not economics. Okay? It's religion that drives human history, not economics. That's the first mistake he made. Second mistake that he made is people care about God, not heaven. Okay? In other words, we're going to heaven not because we think it's a 5-star hotel with like lots and lots of like lobsters and steaks and all-you-can-eat buffets. That's not the reason why we're going to heaven. We're going to heaven to be with God because God represents eternal truth, eternal salvation. We want to be with God. Okay? The third is people care about status, not class. So, in other words, throughout most of human history, we didn't have a concept of money. So, for example, the Vikings, when they went off to steal, they stole lots of gold, right? But when they got back to their village, they would hold a big feast for everyone, and they would waste all this money. You understand? Because there's absolutely no point in having money. You couldn't spend it. If you died, you couldn't keep it. So you made money, you generated wealth in order to raise your status within the community. Okay? And that's why you wore gold, because the gold signified that you have high status within the community. All right? So throughout most of human history, and still even today, we seek status, not class. The concept of class is created because of industrial capitalism, because of the free market, okay? Because now people were mobile, okay? But before, it was about status. Okay, and so what this means is this. Because Marx interpreted history incorrectly, and he didn't really understand human psychology, what he could not predict is when we did achieve communism, it would become bureaucratic hierarchies with cult of personalities. In the Soviet Union, you had Stalin, right? He was in charge of a bureaucracy. And in China, you had Mao Zedong, who was in charge of bureaucracy. North Korea is the same situation. Why? Because of these three factors, right? Mao, Stalin all understood that people want a religion. They want to feel close to God. So they made themselves God. Okay? And people want status, and that's why it's important to have a bureaucracy. So that's why communism became the way it became in the 20th century. All right? Okay, so does this make sense? All right, great. All right, so even though the Marx philosophy is very appealing, it's very clear, it's very direct, it's very sexy, he got the history wrong. And because he got the history wrong, the consequences were huge, okay? Because communism created a lot of wars, and it led to a lot of disasters, like famines and stuff. Okay? Any questions before I move on?